I didn't cry at the funeral. I counted footsteps. The chapel had a shallow echo, the kind you feel in your ribs when someone coughs in the back row. I watched my cousins rise, watched my aunt dab at her eyes with a handkerchief that looked too clean to be sincere, and I breathed through the scent of lilies and old coats. We were here for my great-uncle Walter, the quiet man who never married and always remembered birthdays with postcards that smelled faintly like pipe tobacco. He used to sit on his porch and talk about birds like they were old friends who stopped by to check in on him. I wasn't his favorite. He didn't have favorites. He had a careful way of loving people equally, by showing up, by sending cards, by remembering that I liked honey on toast and that I hated crowds. After the service, the family shifted toward the reception room like a single creature with too many coats. I stood near the coffee urn and watched as people pretended not to watch the lawyer. He was a thin man with a tie that didn't match the day, and he carried a leather folder like it might whisper secrets if he held it wrong. He found me with his eyes and gave the smallest nod. It felt like a pebble dropped in a still pond. I walked to him slowly, as if time might make different choices if I moved gently enough. "Andrew Parker?" he asked, though he already knew. "Yes." "Could you stop by my office tomorrow morning? There are matters Mr. Callahan wanted to clarify." Clarify. The word tasted like dust and keys. "Of course," I said. 9? 9 will do. I didn't sleep much that night. I made tea I didn't drink, turned the mug in my hands like it was capable of telling the future, and sat at my kitchen table with the soft hum of the refrigerator marking seconds. Walter didn't owe me anything. He hadn't owed anyone anything. He'd lived simply, kept a small garden, and fixed things that broke without announcing it. He taught me, quietly, how to take out a window sash without splintering the wood. He'd let me hold the flashlight whenever he climbed under the sink. When my father said, "Not now," to the question of how to tie a bowline, Walter said, "Now is good," and showed me twice. The lawyer's office smelled like lemon cleaner and restraint. He closed the door behind us and gestured to a chair that had been polished by other people's worry. He slid the folder across the desk with the reverence of a priest placing a book on an altar. "Mr. Callahan left a will," he said, as if that part needed to be true out loud. "He had no surviving spouse, no children. He distributed small bequests to several people in the community, his church, the bird sanctuary, a veterans fund. The bulk of his estate, he left to you." I waited for the rest. It walked into the room and sat down between us. "How much is the bulk?" I asked, not because I was greedy, but because honesty sometimes needs numbers to stand up straight. He told me, and the number rearranged the air. 1.2 million. It wasn't a fortune that buys islands. It was a fortune that buys time. It was a fortune that could build something that lasted longer than a headline. "Why?" I asked. "Because questions are better than gratitude when you're unsure where to put your hands." He wrote a letter, the lawyer said, and slid a second envelope toward me. I opened it with care I didn't know my fingers could remember. "Andrew, if you're reading this, I've gone where men my age go when the porch gets too quiet. I watched you grow into someone who keeps his word. You came when I needed the ladder and never left the ladder on the lawn. That meant something. Do something good with this. Don't let it make you worse. W." The letter was short enough to memorize and heavy enough to carry. I put it back into the envelope like a small bird you mean to keep safe. "Does anyone else know?" I asked. "No," he said. "He asked me to inform you first. He assumed you would navigate the family part." The family part. The part where people who haven't asked about your day in months suddenly remember your birthday with enthusiasm. The part where money becomes confession and confession becomes demand. I left the office with the letter in my pocket and a draft of the will in a folder I didn't want to carry publicly. Outside, the sky did what skies do when you expect them to make a decision. It stayed the color it was. At home, I sat with the letter and the number, and the memory of Walter teaching me to listen to pipes with a screwdriver pressed to the metal. Then I called my mother. I told her the funeral had made me tired. I told her I needed a few days to get my feet back under me. I didn't tell her about the will. Not yet. The thing about family is they believe they know the shape of your pockets even when they don't know the shape of your heart. My sister Rachel had a way of making other people's money into a map. She loved ideas that started with, "All we need is," and ended with, "Think about it." My other sister, Emily, had built a life that was warm and loud and perpetually behind on something. They weren't bad people. They were people who had grown used to the idea that I was the part of the foundation you didn't see, the part that kept the house from tipping. I met them for brunch 2 days later because it seemed impolite not to. We ordered eggs and plans. Emily talked about her boys, how the oldest wanted a new bat that cost more than bats cost when we were kids. Rachel discussed a lease for a storefront that sounded like it would butter both sides of the bread and leave the knife clean. My parents smiled like people who wanted to believe the arithmetic would be kind. "How are you?" my mother asked me, the way people ask when they're waiting for you to say, "Fine." "I'm sorting things," I said. "Work's been odd. Contracts fell through. I think I'm going to tighten my belt for a while." Rachel's eyes sparked, the way mercury moves when the thermometer breaks. Tighten how? Like, cut back on extras? Or sell something? Maybe both, I said. I'm not sure yet. We ate in a silence that pretended to be about chewing. No one asked me if I needed help. No one said, "We've got you." I told them I was fine, and then I decided to see whether fine was the only thing they were interested in. I went home and put Walter's letter back on the table. I touched the edge of it the way you touch the sleeve of a jacket you're not sure you're buying. Then I made a decision that shaped the next month like a mold shapes concrete. I would tell my family I'd gotten nothing. Not a penny. Just a box of junk from the garage. A watch that didn't tick. A toolbox without a lid. Old postcards. The man had loved me in the way he knew how. He had trusted me with more than money. I was going to trust my family with less than the truth, and see what they did with it. I called them that night. "Just so you know," I said, voice even, "there wasn't much. Uncle Walter left small donations to some causes, and he left me his old watch and some odds and ends. Nothing big to divide. Nothing to worry about." Rachel made a sound like a smile over a bad card hand. "Well, that's something, I guess. The watch might be valuable." "It isn't," I said. "It runs if you tap it, but it loses time," Emily said. "He loved you in his own way. Like comfort had a script." My father said. "He was always careful." Which can mean anything you want it to mean. I hung up and listened to my apartment breathe. I imagined Walter tapping the watch face, saying, "You nudge it and it tells the truth for a while." And I smiled into a room that didn't ask for anything in return. The days that followed taught me more about gravity than high school physics ever did. When people think you have nothing, they stop leaning in. The group texts that used to vibrate with, "You coming Sunday?" and "Bring the potato salad," went quiet around my name. Rachel called less, and when she did, it was to tell me about an opportunity one might be interested in. A word that meant she wanted a witness for her excitement. Emily still sent me pictures of the boys at practice, but the invitations to stop by became, "We'll see how the week goes." My parents began sentences with, "We worry about you," and ended them with, "Maybe you should consider moving into something smaller, just until you're back on your feet." I tested the table, gently. I told my mother I was thinking of selling my car. "It's just sitting there," I said. "Insurance is a waste if I'm taking the bus to save on gas." She said, "Practical," and then told me she had coupons for the supermarket if I needed them. I told Rachel I was considering taking on a roommate to split rent. "Smart," she said. "Just be careful. Maybe put the more valuable things into storage." She didn't ask what those things were because she already believed she knew. I didn't correct them. I went to the lawyer and set up a trust with a name that sounded like it had a boardroom. I made Emily, my sister Emily, who had never asked me for a dime, my co-trustee. Not because she would get everything, but because she had a consistency that felt like the right kind of anchor. The trust was a shield you could lift with one hand and stop a battle you didn't want to fight. A week later, word leaked that I'd been at the lawyer's office. It leaked because I let it leak. People mistrust coincidences, but they believe in receipts. I made sure a receipt stuck out of my pocket when I bent to tie my shoe near my mother's porch. Rachel saw it from the window and texted me 30 minutes later. "Everything okay, lawyer?" I said. "Just updating some documents." And she wrote back a thumbs up that looked like permission pretending to be concerned. The first real test came on a Tuesday. Rachel asked me to meet her at a cafe that sells coffee the way a jeweler sells rings, slowly, with the suggestion that you should be grateful to be in the room. She wore a scarf that deserved its own line item in a budget. "So," she said, stirring a drink that didn't need stirring, "I've been thinking. You've always been good with numbers. And I've got this boutique lease that's almost too good to be true, but to capitalize, I need a partner. Not an investor, a partner. Someone I trust. We could make it a family venture. Equal shares." "Equal shares?" I asked. "Equal in spirit," she said, which is another way of saying unequal in paper. "How much?" I asked, giving the question a seat. "It depends how quickly we want to scale," she said, which is another way of saying, "as much as you'll give." "What if I told you I have nothing?" I asked, as if we had not rehearsed this dance already. "I'd say you're being dramatic," she replied without blinking, "and that this is bigger than your pride. It's about our family. Family makes a useful currency when your wallet is light." I told her I'd think about it. She told me to think quickly. 2 days later, Emily asked me to dinner. It had been a while. Her boys had soccer cleats in the doorway like small, muddy exclamation points. She made pasta that stuck to itself and tasted like apology. "We're tight," she said, not looking at me. "Bills. The mortgage. Mike's hours got cut and the car needs a new something." She didn't ask for money. She never asks. She simply shows you the table with one plate less than the chairs and waits to see if you'll bring another plate. "Do you need help?" I asked, because sometimes love wears questions. She looked at me then, honest and tired. "We always need help," she said. "But I know you're working through things." "I am," I said, and she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. She has my mother's hands and my mother's way of making a room feel like it might forgive you if you ask correctly. On Friday, my father called and invited me over for a chat. He had a pamphlet on the coffee table for a retirement community with pictures of smiling people holding hands like they had just agreed on something important. "We're thinking," he said, "it might be time to consider downsizing. Your mother's knees are not what knees are in advertisements, and the stairs take themselves too seriously." "It looks nice," I said, turning the page. "The entry fee," he said, as if the words were a hill he had to climb slowly, "is significant. We're not asking, you understand, but if we had a co-signer, the rates change. If you were on a deed, just temporarily." "You want me to put your names on a property I don't own?" I asked gently, and watched his eyes flicker. He didn't like that the sentence sounded strange when I said it plainly. "We'd all be helping each other," he said. "That's what families do. Sometimes, perhaps. Sometimes families also count your spoons and decide how much soup you should be allowed to keep." I told him I'd take the pamphlet and run the numbers, which is the kind of sentence that closes a door without making a sound. That night, I took Walter's watch from the drawer and tapped it on the edge of the table. It ticked obligingly for a few seconds, then slowed. I thought of the trust papers in the safe. I thought of the way Emily had squeezed my hand. I thought of Rachel's scarf and the pamphlet for a future that required my name to look tidy. I decided to build a moment that wouldn't require explanations. Moments like that are better than arguments. They leave less dust. I invited them all to dinner the next week. "My place," I said, and they didn't ask which place because they assumed the answer that suited them. I cook too much food because I have a habit of cooking for people who don't arrive. I set the table with plates that matched and forks that didn't. I lit a candle not because candles change anything, but because light sometimes needs assistance. They arrived like weather, piecemeal, predictable in their unpredictability. Emily hugged me with a real hug. Rachel kissed the air next to my cheek. My mother smoothed the tablecloth like it had offended her, and my father stood in the doorway for an extra heartbeat like maybe he could leave the expectation outside and come back for it later. We ate. We performed. The pasta was better than the last time because I had made it, and because making is different from apologizing. After plates were more empty than full, I put my fork down and let silence announce that something was arriving. Uncle Walter left me something, I said. A watch. Some old letters. And a choice. Rachel sat forward, hungry in a way food doesn't help. What kind of choice? She asked. The kind you don't talk about until you've made it, I said, and watched her sit back unsatisfied. I wanted to see, I continued, what family looks like when it thinks there's nothing to be gained. I wanted to know who called when there wasn't a reason. Who checked in. Who kept their invitations the same. That's not fair, my mother said softly, a tremor under the words. Maybe not, I agreed. But it's honest. Emily reached for her water glass and didn't drink. Rachel folded her napkin into a shape that didn't exist before she touched it. I've set up a trust, I said. My father's eyes missed a beat. Rachel's hand stopped moving. It holds everything I have, and everything Walter wanted me to be careful with. It has rules that make sure the right kind of love doesn't get hurt by the wrong kind of need. What does that mean? Rachel asked, as if understanding would improve the taste of the sentence. It means, I said, it's not a community chest. It means no one can be added to any deed for convenience. It means you can't co-sign your way into my life when the numbers are big and co-sign your way out when they're small. You think we're using you, my father said. It wasn't a question, but it left room as if it wanted one. I think, I said, that when I said I had nothing, invitations dried up like rain and sun. I think when you heard there might be something, you made plans with my name in them. I think Emily held my hand and asked if I needed help without using the word money once. I think Rachel sent me a business plan with the word equal doing a lot of work. I think you brought me a pamphlet that needed me to be a line on it. Silence arrived again, sat down, and made itself comfortable. My mother blinked at the candle like it might explain us. Emily looked at me with something that wasn't surprise and wasn't anger. It was a kind of recognition, like seeing your own handwriting on a wall you didn't expect to write on. What happens now? Emily asked, because she has always known the right question is the map. No, I said. We eat the pie I made and we go home. And tomorrow, and the day after, and all the days after that, we decide how to be a family without pretending that money doesn't enter the room when we do. I'm not cutting anyone off. I'm drawing a line. It's not the same thing. Rachel stood suddenly, the chair legs complaining. You're punishing us for not being perfect, she said. I'm protecting what I built, I replied. And what Walter trusted me to protect. If that feels like punishment, maybe it says something I don't have to. She left without taking pie. My father did the thing men of his generation do when they don't have a tool for a job. He checked his watch, though he didn't need to know the time. My mother hugged me with the part of her arms that still believed hugs repair would. Emily stayed to help wash dishes. We didn't talk about trusts or pamphlets. We talked about the magnolia in the yard and how the boys' uniforms always seemed to find the only mud on a field. After they left, I cleaned the table the way Walter taught me to sand, with the grain, not against it. I put the plates away. I blew out the candle. The room didn't feel empty. It felt accurate. The calls that came next weren't surprising. Rachel sent a message that can be summarized as this: you'll regret this when you need us. My father called to say he hoped I would reconsider, as if reconsider were a place you could move to for the winter. My mother texted a photo of a bird on her feeder with the caption, He'd have liked this one. Emily came by with muffins and no advice. Weeks passed, as weeks do, without asking for permission. I took Walter's watch to a repair shop that smells like old leather and patience. The man behind the counter listened to it with a stethoscope, which shouldn't have worked but did. "It'll never be perfect," he said. "But I can get it to tell the truth most days. That's all it needs to do," I told him. I used part of the money to do something Walter would have approved of, something that didn't require anyone's applause. I established a small scholarship at the local technical college for people who prefer wrenches to whiteboards. I wrote a check to the bird sanctuary he loved. I paid off the last of a debt I owed to a version of myself I didn't particularly like anymore. I didn't post about any of it. I didn't tell the family, not because it was a secret, but because not everything is a group project. One afternoon, at the grocery store, I ran into Rachel in the aisle where they sell choices: pasta, sauce, forgiveness. She looked at me the way you look at a mannequin that's wearing your favorite shirt. "We're not speaking now?" she asked, as if silence had been my idea. "We're speaking," I said. "We're just not trading." "Trading what?" "Assumptions," I said. "Guilt for access. Access for approval." She exhaled a laugh that didn't move air. "You've changed," she said. "I've noticed," I replied. At home, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and listened to a bird I couldn't name. I told Walter about it anyway. I told him I was trying to keep the screws sorted in separate jars. I told him Emily's boys were still playing, still dirty, still loud. I told him the watch was keeping time more often than not. I told him I wasn't angry. He would have liked that part. When the lawyer called to confirm the trust had been recorded, that the documents had said what they needed to say in a way other people understood, I felt a small click inside my chest. It wasn't triumph. It was alignment. Like a door that had swelled in summer and now, finally, was closing without a push. My mother came by a week later with a bag of groceries I didn't need and a jar of soup she insisted I did. She stood in my kitchen and looked at my hands like maybe they held news. "I don't want money," she said without preface, which is what people say when they do want something, but not that. "I want you to have a Sunday where you come and eat and we don't talk about papers." "Sunday's good," I said. "I'll bring pie." She smiled and patted my arm, which is what mothers do when they're saving a bigger hug for when you're not holding something hot. On the way out, she paused at the door. "He picked right," she said. "Who?" "Walter," she answered, and then she left before I could decide what the sentence was for. The trust sits quietly in a folder that my lawyer keeps in a box that has other people's names in it. It doesn't crow. It doesn't threaten. It simply holds its shape. I visit it metaphorically, the way you check on a neighbor's house while they're gone, lights on a timer, shades at different heights, signs that say, "Lived in." I see my sisters sometimes. I say yes to Emily more than she expects, and no to Rachel more than she thinks is polite. My father and I have discovered we can talk about baseball for a long time without touching money, which is a relief for both of us. My mother sends me pictures of birds. If there is revenge in any of this, it isn't the loud kind. I didn't slam a door or read a speech. I set a table, invited everyone, and let the truth be the only thing that didn't need seasoning. I learned that when people show you what love costs them, you should believe the price tag. I learned that a watch that doesn't keep perfect time can still get you where you're going if you're willing to look up every now and then and see the sun. Tonight, I'm making toast with honey because that's what Walter would have done after a long day of not being important to anyone but the people who needed him. I tap the watch. It ticks. I cut the bread. The knife doesn't argue. I sit on the step and watch the light move across the floor like it has somewhere to be and is generous enough to pass through my house on the way. I inherited $1. $2 million and told my family I got nothing. What I kept was something they couldn't spend even if they had the key, the knowledge that I am not the sum of what I can give them, and that the people who stay when there's nothing on the table are the ones you should be setting the table for in the first place. If that sounds like a small victory, You've never had a day where the door closes without force and the house sighs like it finally remembered your name.